Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Amy, a special education teacher, a voracious reader, and today I am here to talk about my December wrap up. And I am so proud of myself because I had a great reading month. In fact, I think two of the books that I read in December actually made it on my best books of 2024. So if you've seen that video, you'll know which two I'm talking about. But I managed to read every book that was on my TBR. So if you watched my December TBR video, you probably already know what they are. But I read all of them with the exception of one, but there's like a reason for that. So, and they go together. I'll explain when I get there. And then I even read more than what was on my TBR. So I had a really great reading month and really enjoyed winter break and having so much time to just read and relax. And it was great. So let's get started. The first book that I read in December was Galatea by Madeline Miller, and she wrote Circe, which is one of my favorite books also. I really enjoyed that one. This is just a short story, and I had picked this up a year or two ago when I was doing some Christmas shopping. This one caught my eye at the local bookstore. And I was like, oh, this one looks all, I don't know, it just felt like wintry holiday vibes to me. Not holiday in terms of that it was going to be like a Christmassy kind of story or anything like that. But it almost gave off like New Year vibes to me because of the blue and gold. And it was just like a really pretty book. And I didn't know what to expect other than the fact that this is a retelling of the Pygmalion myth, but from the point of view of the woman he created out of stone. And I mean, I read this in one sitting. It's very short. It's about, let's see, 50 or so pages, I want to say. 55. And actually, what I appreciated about this story in particular is that there is an afterword where she talks about how she came up with the idea to write this story and what she was thinking about as she was reading the source material. And I'm really glad that she included that in the story because it just made it a better experience for me. Not to say that the story on its own wasn't a great experience, but I'm going to be honest. There's nothing festive about this story. This story is pretty dark and depressing. I mean, it's just, it's a lot. Like, don't read it if you're hoping to like be inspired or feel in a good mood about this. I mean, the ending, depending on how you look at it, I mean, I just wouldn't say it's a happy ending, but I think it's the ending it deserves for sure. But it's just like a really dark tale. It was sort of reminiscent of Yellow Wallpaper, that short story, because it was really interesting going into the mind of Galatea and seeing how she viewed Pygmalion, because you get a lot of her thoughts about things and what she's thinking about the people around her. And you're very aware that through her thought process that she was a woman created from stone. So her perspective on things is slightly different, but I still feel it's in alignment with most modern women readers. So you get to see her perspective of her relationship with her daughter, the predicament that she is in, and you're kind of feeling this tension about what is going to happen. And then you find out what happens, and you're like, oh. So just, read this if you're already in a good headspace, I guess, and you're just ready for like a dark, somewhat depressing tale. But I mean, I still enjoyed it. I think this was worth reading, but yeah, this was an interesting one to start with for December for sure. So I'm glad I read this one first. That's all I can say because you really felt for the main character, you felt for her daughter, and wow, yeah, Pygmalion, quite the villain, we'll say. I also got around to finally reading East of the Sun and West of the Moon, Old Tales from the North, and I read these stories out loud with my younger son, and it was such a fun experience. These tales are really cool. We hadn't read these before, and I've I'm going to be making a video about this later about raising readers, but I've been reading to both of my sons since, I mean, since they were born, probably before they were born. I was probably reading out loud to them. I think I have memories of that. And we've read a lot. So we've read a lot of fairy tales and folk tales from around the world. We have a ton of gorgeous collections. So maybe I'll do a video about my fairy tale and folk tale collections because we have some great ones. So this one was really original. And there was just one that really sort of blew us away. I want to find it. It was the Blue Belt. I don't want to say too much about this, but this was a fun story to read as like a mother with a son because it is actually about a mother and a son to some extent. I'm just going to read just the little intro to the story so you get a feel for this. But there were so many times that I was reading this and then we would just like I'd stop and we would just look at each other and just be like, because it was kind of wild. So, in this adventure story, a beggar woman and her son discover a magic blue belt. In possession of this talisman, the boy has superhuman strength and outsmarts his attackers again and again. In the process, he becomes engaged to the daughter of the King of Arabia. Brave and unrelenting in this fantastical world full of trolls and magic, the son loses and regains much that is vital to him along the way, including his bride to be before his fortune changes. And that really doesn't even give you an insight about a lot of the relationships and how people treat each other in this story. So we had a lot of fun with this one. I really highly recommend this collection, and it's a gorgeous book with a lot of gorgeous pictures in it, and we really enjoy this one. So I have a lot of fond memories of this collection. So if you like folk tales and you like pretty books, check this one out. The next two books I want to talk about, they're by separate authors, but I sort of want to group them together because I can't really talk too much about them. So I read The Christmas Appeal by Janice Hallett, and I read The Mistletoe Mystery by Nita Purse. And both of these books are holiday themed, but they take place in a world that's already been created by their authors. So the Christmas Appeal is a sequel to The Appeal, and the Mistletoe Mystery comes after, I believe, two other books, The Maid and I don't remember what the sequel was named, The House Guest, maybe, and I don't know if there's a third one yet. In the Christmas Appeal, we are still following all the same characters from the original Appeal, with some exceptions. And it's still following a murder mystery plot that takes place at this theater setting, and they're all getting ready to put on a holiday production. And there's so much drama going on between everyone involved in trying to put this play together. It was really over the top. I found it to be really funny, even though it's a murder mystery. And when you discover more about that part towards the end of the book, I mean, it is sort of, I mean, obviously, murder and death is sad, but leading up to it, there's just so many crazy hijinks in this story and the way people just interact with one another, especially around the holiday season. It was wild. It was fun. It was over the top. This book I felt, does not take itself too seriously in that way. And I feel like that was a really good thing, a really positive thing. So I don't know how other people felt about it, but I really enjoyed it. This was a fun read. But just like the Mistletoe Mystery, you really can't read this one if you haven't read The Appeal. I don't recommend reading this separately. If you ever get around to the holiday season, you're like, oh, I'm looking for a fun holiday read. Don't read it if you haven't read The Appeal, because you are going to be confused. You really are. I could see where people would be confused reading this because it just jumps right into the action set right after the original book. So I already knew who these characters were and what their personalities were. So if you just kind of jump into this, you might feel a little lost. But also, because of certain things that are discussed in this book, it will spoil major spoilers for the first book. And you don't want to do that to yourself. So definitely read The Appeal and then next holiday season, check out The Christmas Appeal if you haven't already read it, because it's really fun. And same thing with The Mistletoe Mystery. I enjoyed this one, a totally different vibe from The Christmas Appeal. Whereas that one was like over the top craziness, it was zany, it was so weird the way people act in that book. But The Mistletoe Mystery was very heartfelt, very sweet, perfect for the holiday season. And I just love Molly the maid so much. And I love her relationship with her boyfriend, and I love her relationship with her grandfather and just the friends that she's made. So this is also why you really need to read the other books first, or you're really going to spoil a lot for yourself in this one. And because I read the first two books, what she experiences in this particular book meant even more to me, because she already felt like a friend and I was already so invested in what she had already gone through leading up to this book. And I feel like the way the author presented this story, if you already know the characters and what has happened in the past, it's almost like dramatic irony. It's somewhat dramatic irony in a way, but not ironic. It's more like we know a lot of what is happening that Molly doesn't understand and she's interpreting in different ways. So I figured out very early on whether, and I feel that was intentional, but I wonder if other people think that it wasn't. I'm not sure. But I felt like, oh, I know exactly what is going on here that Molly doesn't understand. And then that created the tension for me of, oh, I know how this is going and how she's dealing with this or thinking about this in a different way. And that's just creating like all of this suspense and tension, which dramatic irony is supposed to do. But I'm also aware, because this is a holiday book and it is giving all this like tender, endearing, heartfelt vibes, that I know at the end it's going to have a very like happy, sweet ending. So even though I felt all that suspense and tension along the way, there were also all of these very like sweet moments written in. I just felt the whole thing was really, her books are just so sweet and they just make me feel really like cozy when I read them. I just, it's perfect. And it really helped to like offset a lot of the horror that I read later after this book in the month. So I highly recommend it if you like something that's much more on the sweet, cozy side during the holiday season. But once again, if you haven't read the other two, don't read this one because you're going to spoil so much and you're going to be confused and you're not going to have the same experience. It's not going to feel as meaningful. Like it'll still feel like, oh, that was a nice, cute little book, but it'll feel more meaningful if you've already experienced, been along the ride with Molly the whole time. That's all I'm going to say. The next book I read was Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach, and I already talked about this book more in depth in my best books of 2024. And I was really surprised that this book would end up on my best of the year. How it ended up even coming onto my radar is, I think over the summer I was randomly perusing Barnes and Noble. No, it wasn't random. I was there for an event. There were speakers there for a mystery panel. But after the event, I was just perusing all the shelves as one does. Like, what are you going to do at a bookstore? You're going to spend like an extra hour or two there just looking at all the shelves. Oh, wait, is that just me? I don't know. And I just came across Pen Pal on a display table. So I actually thought it was a new book, and I picked up and read the back, and it sounded very intriguing to me, and I thought the cover looked cool also. Turns out when I actually took out the book from the library in December, that it came out in like 2012, I think. So this was a much older book. I want to say it was 2012. It was definitely way earlier than 2024. We'll say that. And it just, I expected something completely different. So I don't want to say too much about this book. If you want, I don't feel like I did too many spoilers. I try to keep it spoiler free on the 2024 video, but I don't want to keep this one too long, and I said everything I want to say in that video, but this was not what I expected. I thought this was going to be a pen pal situation like what we think of when it comes to pen pals, where we're writing back to and forth to someone that we know or think we know. That's not what this is. And it's very creepy and it's very sad and it's horrific. And it was just, it blew me away. And I'm not going to say that this was like a perfect book by any means. I had really great conversations with a friend of mine who also read the book, and there were some things that we had questioned about some of the choices, but overall, in terms of the intensity of the book, the way it made me feel, and how just horrible this ending was, and the commentary on just childhood trauma and memories, and how kids view things very differently than adults do, and what happens when we try to keep things from children. So I would say like a lot of trigger warnings for like childhood trauma and stalkers and all kinds of things. I mean, so it's an intense book, but it's also a beautiful book because it had so much beautiful things to show about childhood friendship and first love, in my opinion. So it's like he just did this amazing job of weaving in all these like beautiful moments of someone's childhood with all like the most horrific things that could happen in someone's childhood. So it was, like I said, an intense read. Made it on my best of 2024. I highly recommend it. So if you do check it out, make sure you come back to this video and let me know what you thought of it, because I'm really curious. The next two books I read in December were both audiobooks. The first one was The Spite House by Johnny Compton, and the second one was The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Kist. So once again, I read both of these books on audio, and they were both really great reading experiences. I highly recommend the audio for both of these, but I don't think you would go wrong if you just read the book without it being on audio. But I really enjoyed the listening experience, especially The Spite House. I felt the narrator, he did such a fantastic job. He has such a great speaking voice, and I really like how he brought the dialogue especially to life. And both of these books were great, both horror. The Spite House was about a man who is basically on the run with his two daughters. He has a almost adult daughter. She's like an older teenager, and then like a very, I think his younger daughter is somewhere between like 6 and 8, I want to say. But she's like very smart and like very advanced for her age, but there is a wide age gap between the two daughters. And the majority of the book is trying to solve the mystery as well of like why they are on the run, why they have just up and tried to make themselves vanish, which is very difficult to do because it takes place in this time period. So there are things like the internet and phones and all of these things. So just trying to figure out how they are going to like avoid detection, or if they even can, was very compelling in the story. But also it really raises the stakes because he ends up getting a job essentially staying in a haunted house and recording things in a journal for the person who has ownership of the house. And I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give spoilers away, but he does ask, is it safe for me to be here with my kids? And they tell him, yes, it's totally safe for you to be here with the kids. Read to find out if it's safe to be there with kids. But it is a very awesome read. I really enjoyed all of the characters in that family, and just seeing the dynamics between this dad and his daughters and the siblings and their interaction with one another. And I felt like the mysteries that were revealed, especially about the family and why they left, was really interesting, and it tied in a really cool way with what was going on with the house. And I just felt like the commentary in the book was really well done, because there was commentary on race, because you do have this family and they are people of color moving from an area that's much more diverse to an area that is not diverse at all, and just worrying about, how they're going to interact in that town, and also knowing like that they are standing out in some way when they're really trying to not stand out at all. So there was commentary about that as well, but there's also a lot of commentary about grief and about just the choices that we need to make and what we're willing to sacrifice. But also, I felt like a lot of commentary on, how do I word this? I felt like there was a good use of metaphor when it came to ghosts and what makes us alive or makes us dead. And I thought also the juxtaposition between the main character, the father, with what we learn about his grandfather, and how they had very different perspectives or different approaches to life, and how this also related to how he was going to survive in this haunted house was also very interesting. So there were just so many great things about this book. So it had everything I love: a creepy haunted house, mystery. I didn't find it to be too scary. It wasn't too like up on the horror. So there isn't anything that I can think about that's not like, to me, gory or anything like that. But what could happen to you in that house? Sometimes with horror, things don't have to be gory. There doesn't have to be like a ton of body horror for something to be horrific or scary conceptually. So I felt like, oh, wow, this really gives you a lot to think about if this were like actually real. But there is a lot of supernatural horror. There's a lot of psychological horror, and I just enjoyed everything about this book. So I can't wait. At the end of the audiobook, there was a first chapter of his next book. I think Devil Kills is like in the title. I know I don't have that completely right, but when I listened to that, I have to read that book. So I will definitely be getting to that book sometime this year, but I will definitely read more of what Johnny Compton comes out with, because Spite House was fantastic. Another great book that I read in December was The Haunting of Elkwood by Gwendolyn Kist. And once again, I read this on audio, and it was a really great reading experience. What I love most about this book is that it was very atmospheric. It wasn't a traditional horror, even though it's labeled as horror. Personally did not find this book to be scary at all. There were some creepy moments in it, but I wouldn't say it was traditionally scary. In fact, there were a lot more, I felt like, sci-fi supernatural elements in it, but there was definitely some psychological horror going on there, a lot of weird stuff. But like I said, what I enjoyed was the writing style of it, and that the mood and atmosphere created by these descriptions and these words, and even what was happening in the plot, just felt so melancholy and so somber. And it just went through the whole book. It was just like quite a vibe. And more than anything else, I feel like the heart of this book is a love story. And it was very just sad. And the whole book was really like tragic in a way. And it just had a lot to say, I feel, in terms of commentary about childhood trauma, about what makes people, once again, similar to the Spite House, even if you are alive at a traumatic event, like what does it really mean to be alive versus what does it really mean to be dead? I think that's, a big metaphor question in this book. And I enjoyed most of it. It was, a very like weird, like I said, atmospheric book. We have our main character, and she is an adult, but when she was a teenager, her whole town and all the people in it, including her mother and her younger sister, just vanished. And this happened while she was away at college with her friends. And it's just like a really weird thing, obviously, that the whole place just, there isn't even any houses. So now there's these scientists and investigators that want to go back there and kind of figure out what happened. and they contact her to come back with them so they can interview her. And she's not really interested in revisiting, but she sort of is. There's really only one big reason for why she wants to go back and uncover things. But there's a lot of reasons why she doesn't want to go back either. And all of these things are revealed throughout the book. And we just sort of get to know her relationship with the people that were closest to her before the town disappeared, what led up to the town disappearing, and just how what adults do sometimes has a really big impact on kids in a lot of ways, and the kind of grown-ups that they turn out to be. And at the end of the day, I feel like the real evil that was going on, because you are kind of wondering about some of these like figures, these like horror like characters that we're not sure like who or what they are, but the real evil were the people. The real evil was the people in this town, we'll just say. So I definitely felt like it was worth reading. I enjoyed it, but I felt it was more sad and tragic and really focused on more of a love story than it being a traditional horror. And I don't have a problem with that at all. I thought it was a great book. The only area that I sort of struggled with is that there were times when I felt frustrated with the main character. And I understand that she had a ton of trauma, and I understand that there's probably a lot of survivor's guilt going on. But I do feel at the end of the day, some of her choices, I couldn't relate to if I was in her situation, I guess. And I understand like what was important to her that meant a lot within this town, but I also feel like what she still had after that tragedy was still a lot as well, and why I just sort of kind of questioned her interaction with this other character and why there needed to be all these communication breakdowns. So I felt like even though I enjoyed the characters, I still felt really frustrated some of the time with this main character. But I mean, no book is perfect, and I definitely still recommend this one. It had a lot going for it, and her writing style and the way that she creates an atmosphere was really great. And the last two books that I read in December were unhinged horror books. This book, My Darling Girl by Jennifer McMahon, I waxed poetic about because this turned out to be in the number 2 spot for my best of best for 2024 out of the 76 books that I read. I still think about this book. I still talk about this book. And it was funny because recently I went on to Goodreads because I was having this conversation with someone about books that I didn't enjoy, and then reading the 5-star reviews and just wondering about why people really loved a book that I absolutely despise. So I went on and actually purposely chose to read the 1-star reviews for this book. And I don't know, I feel like these 1-stars really reveal more about the people and their values, I guess, than they do about the book. But also, they kind of made an impression that if you enjoy this book, you're just kind of a basic person. I don't know. I thought this book was fantastic. Highly recommended. I thought it was scary. And usually I'm the kind of person who sees like things coming through the buildup. I was really surprised by this. This book really made me freaked out. I like yelled out loud like twice. And not even because, once again, like there's no like body horror in this. This isn't graphic violence, but this one I felt in a lot of ways was definitely the scariest book that I read in December, and one of the scariest books that I've read all year, and maybe even more than that. I and it has everything that I love in it. So once again, we have Alice O'Connor, and she was raised in a very abusive household. She has an older brother, and they have very different viewpoints or different ways that they deal with this. So she likes to try to focus on the positives and what the good things that she remembers about her mother in her childhood. And her brother is like, no, he only remembers the bad. He wants nothing to do with anything. And she has been estranged from her mother for a long time. It's the holiday season. She's just focused on her own family. She isn't the most like Christmas loving person, but her husband is super obsessed with Christmas and decorating and doing all the things. And they have two daughters, a teenage daughter and a younger daughter. And she just wants to have a good Christmas. But then she gets a call and finds out that her mother is dying of cancer and only has weeks to live. Can she come back and live with her instead of, living out her days in a hospital? And they'll have hospice set up and all these things. And she is conflicted about this, but ultimately agrees. And it's really about coming to terms with what had happened in her childhood and why those things happened and what they all mean. And we have, I don't know, just so many things that I love from the horror genre in here, but I don't want to talk too much about them because I feel like they'd be major spoilers. But I also feel like this should be a movie. Like, this needs to be a movie. There's parts of it that I can just imagine would make a great found footage horror movie, and that's one of my favorite genres of horror movies. I love this book so much. I'm currently reading another book by Jennifer McMahon and enjoying that. So it's really nice that at the end of the year, I found another author that I'm like, oh, I want to read everything that you write. I really enjoy your stories. And yeah, this is a great one. Highly recommend. Okay, so in my December TBR video, I said that I was going to read Candy Cane Kills and Candy Cane Kills Again, the sequel. And I only ended up reading Candy Cane Kills, and I'll explain why. This book was wild and unhinged. This one has a lot of graphic violence in it. There's much more body horror in this one, very creative death scenes. This is a slasher. Did I mention it's by Brian McCauley? And I had read Curse of the Reaper by him and really loved it. And I enjoyed this book, but the intensity of the violence and like the nonstop killing that happened in this book, and I read it. I started reading it Christmas Eve and I finished it on Christmas Day. But it was a lot. It was a lot. So I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to save Candy Cane Kills Again for next Christmas because I figured if this was as intense as it was with the violence, the sequel was going to be just as intense. And I just didn't want to put myself through that. Maybe other people didn't feel like this was that intense, but I don't know. I think everybody has their preferences in terms of what they can handle in terms of horror and what they find scary, because other people might not find My Darling Girl that scary. I did conceptually and just the way things happened with this book. I'm like, oh man, like I found that to be scarier than Pet Sematary. This one here, it's just a different kind of horror. Like it's just nonstop slasher violence, craziness ensues. And I don't necessarily find those scary. I find that kind of horror like gross. So I tend to not read a lot of body horror books. It's just like not my favorite genre. But I'm glad I read this. In this book, we're following our main character, Austin. He's a teenager. He's going through some teenage things. He's got some things going on in his life right now that his family doesn't know about. And they spring on him something they think the family's going to love. And he's not really that down for it, but he doesn't really have a choice. So they're going to go away for the holidays and stay in a cabin in the woods, very isolated as a family. And Austin realizes that his parents are sort of doing this as like a last ditch effort to kind of keep their relationship going because it's sort of on the rocks. And then he has a younger sister and they have somewhat of a complex relationship. But ultimately, they find out, it's really not a spoiler, it's on the back here. I mean, they're staying in a place that a horrific crime took place. and the legend of Candy Cane is born. And we find out all about Candy Cane and what their deal is. And then all these horrific things happen. It's very violent. And I found parts of it kind of sad, to be honest with you. I was hoping for different outcomes. I was actually surprised by some things that happened, and I felt sad about them. Um, but the ending was very interesting. It was very complete. I am interested in reading the sequel and figuring out what comes next after this one, because I'm really like not sure what direction it's going to go in, because I actually felt like this had a complete ending. So I am excited to read the sequel next year, but I just need to put some distance between the two books. I am curious, if you are someone who enjoys the horror genre, what types of horror do you gravitate towards? Like, what subgenres are you most interested in? Do you really like the intense body horror, graphic violence horror books? Or do you like things that are more like supernatural in nature, that have to do with ghosts or the supernatural? Do you like things that are more psychological horror in nature, where we're not sure if someone is dealing with like a mental health issue, or if it actually is supernatural, or if there's another reason to explain the phenomenon that's happening? What kind of things do you find particularly scary versus what things do you not find particularly scary? I'm really curious. So definitely let me know down below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and a like. And I hope you'll subscribe, because I've got more videos coming up talking about the books that I'm reading and just talking about all kinds of bookish things. And thanks for stopping by. I'll see you next time.